there's an expression in English that goes something like, well, what's that got to do with the price of tea in China? And that means, what you're saying doesn't make any sense because what's it got to do with anything? That's the point of it. So on today's episode of Life's Potluck Buffet, we're going to try to talk a little bit about expressions related to that and maybe the origin of that expression a little bit, and also about how to make sense of it all by asking the cards the same question. So stick around for today's episode of Life's Potluck Buffet. I'm John Paulus. Thanks for joining me. The expression, what's that got to do with the price of tea in China, is commonly thought to be related to the obsession in the House of Commons with the price of tea in China. And there's real good evidence for this in the 1800s. If you look at the records of the House of Commons of the United Kingdom, you'll see that there is a lot of testimony on the price of tea in China and a lot of discussion. Just from a brief review of that testimony, I could tell you it was intensely important. So that is probably where that comes from. The first evidence of it in use as a kind of catch-all for that doesn't make any sense. It seems to be in the United States in some discussions of trade, interestingly. So maybe they were imitating something that they knew about the British Parliament. I haven't looked through congressional records in the United States. I'm not sure that the price of tea in China was that important to the United States. In fact, in the United States, it's really officially what's that got to do with the price of tea in Kenya should be the expression, because the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank has commodity prices and charts for various commodities. The one that they track is the price of tea in Kenya. And right now, that's what they consider to be the global price of tea. That's the source that's important for their charts. And in U.S. cents per kilogram, right now it's around 315 cents for a kilogram, which is 2.2 pounds if you're a U.S. listener and don't know the conversion to kilograms. And that is, so that's that $3.15 per kilogram of Kenyan tea. That's the price right now. It's it's up a little bit from the early 90s, and the early 2000s, but it's in the higher range that it's been trading, of where it's been trading since 2008. So that gives you a sense of what's the price of tea, and I guess from Kenya. So that is that's okay. That's enough tea talk, I think, for now. But this expression may have, people have been saying, what sense does that make for time immemorial? So it's really hard to say, what was the first time? I found a really interesting one, which is in Hebrew, which I don't speak Hebrew, so I'm going to try really hard to get the pronunciation of this right. And it's Ma'inyan Shemitah Tzal Sinai. So what's the Shemitah got to do with Mount Sinai? And I'll explain. This particular expression goes back to commentaries from the 11th century. So they're commentaries by, interestingly, a French rabbi who's born in the Champagne region of France, Champagne in France, where, the bubbly wine comes from, Champagne. And this is a famous commentator who's known by the name Rashi, but his given name was Shlomo Yitzhaki. And in French, he's known as Salomon de Troyes. And not Troyes as in three, but Troyes as in Troyes, the town in Champagne that he's from. So that saying has to do with his commentary on the well, him basically saying, well, what's that got to do with anything, in a commentary on the Torah. And that is the Shemitah is this, it's called in English a sabbatical year. And that originally has to do with the 7 year cycle of agriculture, uh, and every seventh year, the I, the idea that the land should be lay fallow, it would just be made to rest, and so that's what the Shemitah is all about. And so it's like the seventh year of an agricultural cycle where the fields are laid fallow, and that is and what does that have to do with Mount Sinai? Because he's asking what's this got to do with Mount Sinai? This passage about Moses and Mount Sinai, and so he's kind of asking the question: what sense does this make? This comment that he's making, and so there's an interesting that's like an early example of this kind of like, what sense does that make? Saying, well, what's this got to do with this random thing? If in French, I wonder if so. There's a saying in French, which is aucun rapport avec la choucroute. So it's nothing to do with sauerkraut. Or basically, what's that got to do with sauerkraut? Quel rapport? So that's kind of interesting. This is another food-related expression about this. There's a Polish one too that I found out, and for those of you who've seen my episode on Wrocław, this is probably what you say in Wrocław when you say, well, what sense does that make? And it's Soma piernik do wiatraka, and apparently that means what does gingerbread, piernik means gingerbread, and wiatraka means windmills. So that's the question: is what's gingerbread got to do with windmills? Again, another food item, and also, a not maybe what we'd call a non sequitur. It doesn't follow that this has anything to do with anything, and so therefore, what sense does that make? Do you know any expressions in a language that you love that has to do with, like, that doesn't make sense, and you say something like, well, what's that got to do with blank? Let me know in the comments. I'm really curious. And I wonder if we can have one for Life's Potluck Buffet. I was thinking about it because I was just seeing that the price of olive oil is very high right now. And I was thinking about that. That's why I kind of started thinking about all of this, because I was thinking, well, what's that got to do with the price of olive oil? And I wonder if we could say, like, what did Dutch ovens have to do with the price of olive oil? That might be a good one. I like that one. So maybe I'll go with that. But let's ask the cards: how do we make sense of what's going on in our lives and work, and what's a good way to do that? So I'm gonna shuffle the cards as always with our ritual shuffle, and then I'm gonna draw a card, and that'll be our card for the day. So here we go. Yellow lemons, blue dumplings, magenta noodles. Cards, tell us some things. All right. Nope, here it is. Here's the top card. Oh, it's Culture is a Living Being. It's card 47. This is a great one to make sense of everything in our lives. Get ready. So, culture is a living being. Every identifiable arrangement of human beings has a culture. Like any living being, cultures wish to reproduce themselves and stay alive. Cultures speak through their people without the people being aware of it. While still part of a culture, a person cannot stand apart from what keeps the culture alive. The culture will not allow it. So identify different work cultures and other various organizational cultures in which you operate, and say what one of those cultures is doing that keeps it alive. Just pick one culture that's in your life in terms of work or organizational culture, and come up with what the most kind of basic thing is that keeps it alive, that you know deep down, even if it's not on the top of your mind, You know deep down what drives that culture that you are operating in. So think about that and think about culture as a living being. And I'll see you tomorrow on Life's Potluck Buffet.